To be able to create an application of any level of complexity, you need to first learn how to work with CRUD operations. CRUD stands for Create, Read, Update and Delete, and these are essential operations in all applications. In this video, we will create the different components in our Blazor Web App to perform these operations using scaffolding. We will cover various topics, including working with data in our Blazor Web App, connecting our project to a database, understanding how form submission and validation work in Blazor, and much more. So let's get started. So let us just create a new project here. We're going to select Blazor Web App template here. I'll name the application Blazor CRUD. Click on next, and I'm going to let the interactivity to be a server, so interactive server rendering, and I'm going to set it, leave it as it is, per page component and not globally. I'm going to create the project now. Okay, the project is created. The first thing we are going to need is we're going to need to create a data model for us to be able then to perform the CRUD operations for that data model. So I'm going to the project directory here, and I'm going to add a models folder. Inside this folder, I'm going to add a class, a model class. Let's say a model class for student. Let's give a few properties to this class. Public int ID property. As always, a property for the ID, and then a property for the name. I'll set it to be nullable. So name. For the age, and one for the, let's say, a date time property for the birthday. Let's just leave it with these 4 properties. Right now, the Blazor actually gives us the option to create all of the pages or components to be able to perform the CRUD operations for a specific model. And we can do this by just going to the components folder, to the pages folder here, and I'm going to click on add a new scaffolded item. Let me go to Razor components and click on Razor component using Entity Framework. This is basically a very easy way and a simple way for us to get started with Blazor, even if we have some specific project and we could, for example, we could only need like a create page, an edit page, or one of these. We can select only one of these options here, but for this video I'm going to tell Blazor to create all of the five pages for our CRUD operations. I'm going to select the model to be student, the model that we created. Then I'm going to add a new DB context class here that we haven't created yet. Basically, this is just the C# class that connects our models to the database. Each time we create a new model, a new data model, we write its instance inside this context class. And then when we want to access some specific data or some specific model, we then again use the context to get the data from it. So I'm just going to add a new context here. I'm going to leave the database provider to be SQL Server. Click on add and let the Blazor do basically all the work for us. Okay, inside the pages folder, we have a student pages folder with all of our CRUD pages, or with our components. We have a create component here, a delete details component, edit and an index component here as well, and we're going to see what all of this do and how they work. But firstly, we're going to need to, I'm going to create a database so that we store all of the data in it, and then we do this CRUD operations by accessing the database. So I'm going to go to View, Server Explorer, click here on Create New SQL Server Database. I'm going to need the server name of my SQL Server Management Studio. I'll take the server name here, input it here, and in the encrypt field here, I'm going to set the encryption to optional, or basically to false initially, so that we do not need to log into the database with a password or so each time when we access the database. Click on Trust Server Certificate, and I'm going to give a name to our database. Let's say Blazor CRUD data. Click on OK. A database instance is created. In the properties folder here we have the connection string, which I'm going to need to take and paste it in the app settings.json. Basically, when we added our scaffolded item, Blazor created like an address here for the database, a connection, since we see here a connection string to be inputted there. But I'm just gonna substitute it with our database instance that I just created. So here we see the encryption was put to false, the database name is here, and then this connection string should already be in the service in program.cs file. So right now all that's left to do is to add migrations to our database. Adding migrations basically means that we specify our database schema. So I'm gonna need to go to Tools, NuGet Package Manager and Package Manager console. And we need to write the command add migration and the name for the migration. And basically what will be inputted in the database is the model that we created with its properties. This is the migration. Is basically, you can see it here, a migrations folder we created in our project. It's basically a C# class specifying a database schema. I'm just going to need to write the command here, update database. And our model will be then stored in the database with our specifications, and now we are ready to basically see how these CRUD operations work. The index page, if we can see it here, has, let's find the route, which is /students. So this is where we'll go first. And just go to /students. Okay, we have an empty table here. If I click on create new, we'll be redirected to the create page. Let me give a name here to, okay, Sean, the age 20, and I'm selecting a birthday. If I click on create, we see that we have a student basically was created in the database, and then it's stored. Here we have its name, the age, the birthday, which is not as well shown actually the date, so we actually don't need the hour here, but we'll modify it later. And on the end, on the last column, we have 3 links that take us to the details page with all of the details of the student. The edit page allows us to modify the data here. If I click on save, we see that the age was modified. And if I click on delete, here we have the option to delete this student from the database. So we can see that our CRUD operations are functional and work pretty well right now. We just will see how each of these pages actually works in detail. So if I go back, we'll start with the index page. The main part of the index page here is the quick grid built-in component. Quick grid is a data grid component that is built in Blazor. Quick grid can access data from different kind of sources. Here in the items attribute, we are accessing the data from our DB context. Here on top of the page, we're injecting our context here, and we're giving a name of DB. And then we are taking the data from the context. This built-in component is very useful actually because it offers multiple features like sorting, enabling pagination to the tables, and much more actually, which we're not going to see all in this video. But let's just see. Below we see these property column tags that basically specify each column that will be inside of the table. We are in this property attribute here, we're specifying each property of our student's model. So the student's name, the student's age, birthday, and we are accessing this by accessing the data from the context. And below on the last column, as we saw, we are using this template column built-in component. We are just specifying some links to go to the edit page, details page, and to the delete page of that specific student using this student ID. And this is what we can do in this quick grid component is that, as we saw, the birthday was not specified as we wanted it to. We can basically add a format attribute, and let's say they set it to month, day, and year. If I run the project, this should be able to remove the time of the age, but we don't have a student anymore here, so let me create a new one. James Johnson, 40, pick a birthday and click on create. We'll see that in the birthday column we do not see the time anymore, we only see the specific date. Let me go back to our project. We can use properties to change how this column's name will be displayed. So birthday, we can set it to, if we would want to change it, let's say we can use the title property to set it to date of birth, let's say. We should see the column name will be changed here. Date of birth. And this is basically it for the index page. If I go now, let's just go to the create page. We can see that in our create page, we're using an edit form built-in component. And this built-in component is just substituting the form HTML tag, and it makes it much easier to connect the data of the form to a specific model. Here we have specified the method type to be of post, and we can see this model attribute that specifies the model the data model, which is student. Actually, this connects the data that will be submitted from the form. It connects it to this student property here. We can see that this student property here has an attribute above, supply parameter from form, which basically specifies that as soon as the data is submitted in the form, it will be bound to this property here. Then we'll use this property data here in this add student method below. Actually, we can see that the form had an onValid submit attribute as well, which was set to add student. So this is the method that will be invoked as soon as the data in the form was correctly submitted. So it was validated, the validation was also done correctly, which we'll see in a bit, and then the form was submitted, the method here will be invoked, and we'll basically store inside the context using this add method here our student that was submitted in the form. We'll save the changes to the database and then we'll navigate back to the index page. One last thing is the form name was specified to create here in this using this form name attribute, and this is necessary in cases that we have multiple forms in our page, and when we basically have a property below here, we can specify the form name inside this property so that the data of each specific form will be bound to the correct property. In our case, we do not need this because we only have one form, but if we would need to, we could use it. The last thing we see, we have an enhance attribute in the edit form component. This basically enables enhanced form handling in Blazor. This is something similar to the enhanced navigation that we saw in a few videos back. So when a form is basically submitted, the Blazor intercepts the form submission, performs a fetch request to the server, and gets a response from the server basically, and performs the needed changes in the DOM. It's basically a feature that makes the form more interactive and enhances it. So we can see, basically saw also before how the form worked, but let's just see now what we have inside the edit form. We have some divs. In each div we have a label for the input. We have, in the first case here, we have an input text built-in components that only takes text input, and its value is binded to with this bind value attribute is binded to the student.name, so to the name property of the student model. And in the second case, we have an input number component, then an input date component depending on the data that we are inputting there. This is bounded to the specific property of the model, so that then all of the data that will be submitted by the form will be easily bound to our property, to our student property here below. And we can see basically that we have on the end of each div, we have a validation message component here. We saw on top also we have a data annotations validator and a validation summary component. What these now do is that they validate the data so that the correct input will be submitted there. To be more specific, let me show you how this works. If I go back to the models class that we created above, we can input restrictions for our properties here. Let's say we can, using data annotations, I can put the name to be required. And let's say I'm gonna put the age to be in a range within 18 and 35. So students have to be in an age between 18 and 35. Then this data annotations validator will display an error message on the end of each input, and also on top of the page a validation summary with all of the errors that occurred. So let me just run the project so that you can see how that basically works. Okay, let's create a new page, let's create a new student, and let me put a name like Tim here. Let's put the age to be 36. Let's input a birthday, click on create, and we see that the form was actually not submitted. We see the error message here. The field age must be between 18 and 35, just like we specified it. And we see on top of the page a summary of all of the validation errors that occurred. If I correct it to be 34, let's say, and click on create, this student will be stored in a database, and then we can see it in our index page. This was actually quite useful, but one thing missing is that we would want actually to validate, for the application to validate the input as soon as we click out of the input form. We can enable this in Blazor, but we're going to need to make our component page interactive. How we'll do this? We just need to specify the render mode on top of the page to be interactive server, since we created an application that allows interactive server rendering. And if I run the application now, it will be more interactive, and the validation will happen just as soon as we click out of the form. Let's just try it one more time. Let's set it to Peter. If I put age 15 and I just click away of this input form, we'll see that this was validated, and we see that the age field must be between 18 and 35. We can actually see in the first input form that we see a green outline, which basically says that the data inputted is correct. And this is what we'll see also if we fix the age here. We'll see that the form is outlined with this green color here. Let me input a birthday here and create the other student. So we have 3 students now. Let's go to the delete page. So on top of the page, we have like this big header asking us if we really want to delete the student. And here is displayed if the student is not basically loaded yet. We see this message. If so, we'll see all of the data of the student, and then an edit form again, an edit form component to basically delete this student. In our code block here, what we see is that we see an ID property which has this attribute supply parameter from query. What this does is that this ID property gets the value from the URL. When we go to that URL, let me just go to the delete page of the first student. In the URL, we see that we have an ID equal to 2. And what this does is that this property will get, in this case, this ID property will get the value from the URL. And then we're going to use it down below. Actually, we have an initialized async method, which is a method that is initialized as soon as the component renders. We are basically going to find the student by checking through our database for the student with that ID that we got from the URL. And then we're going to use this student data here, firstly to display the name, the age, the birthday of the student. And then we're going to use it down below here in the edit form. If the form is submitted, when I click to the button here, this unvalid submit method will be triggered, the delete student method. And here we basically go to the context and remove that student, save the changes to the database, and go back to the students, to the index page. Let's just go to the details page now. The details page as well has an ID property that gets the value from the URL. Then as soon as the component renders, this uninitialized async method is called. It loops through basically the student with that specific ID in the database, and then it displays the data to the users, as we can see here. Pretty simple. The edit page, then basically it is similar to our create page. We have this edit form built-in component, but the only difference is that the data is already filled in the inputs of this form, because as soon as the component is rendered, a database check is being done to find the student with that ID that we get from the URL here. When it finds the student, then its data will be inputted to each input here, and we can then make a change, make a modification to any of the input that we would want to. If we click on save, then the update student method will be triggered, which we can see here below. Basically, the first line basically just helps the context to track the changes in the context, so sets the state of this entity to modified, and then the changes will be saved to the database. If an error occurs, will be redirected to a not found page, otherwise will just then be redirected again to the students page here. Let me just show you how the edit works. So if we click on edit, we see that the input is already filled with the user's data with the ID of 2 actually in our case. If we make any modification here and save the changes will be saved and we are still redirected to the index page. If you enjoyed this video, you can continue watching my other videos in the Blazor series, which you can find linked on the screen. If you got value from the video, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel or give the video a like. Give me a comment below if you have any questions or feedbacks, and thank you as always for watching. I'll see you next time.